Oh, hello. Today we are wrapping up my reading for the month of March, and when I was pulling the numbers, I realized that holy shnikes, I read so much. Some of that is that I have been refinding my audiobook mojo in the last couple of months. During quarantine or like working from home, I've not had as many opportunities to get into audiobooks in terms of some of the normal times when I would listen to them, but I've been refinding my groove, so that's helped. And then I've also just been reading a lot of Kindle Unlimited stuff. But yeah, I read 30 books in March. Wow. Okay, so let's get into it. We'll talk about my stats, and then we'll talk about my surprises, my hits, and my disappointments. So, stats-wise, like I said, I read 30 books in the month of March, 22 of which I owned, 8 of which I did not, for a total page count of 9,104 pages and an average book length of 303 pages. I paid for a third of the books that I read, and the average amount that I paid for them was $3.10. The average amount of time a book had been on my TBR was 9 months, and the average age of book was 4 years. I read a lot of ARCs this month. 9 of the books that I read I got from publishers, and the rest were from sort of my usual lineup of suspects. And then genre-wise, my 2 biggest ones were contemporary romance and mystery. Again, considering how many ARCs I read this month, that makes sense. Because those are often the genres that I get ARCs for. But then also had a good chunk of fantasy, a good chunk of nonfiction, speculative romance, sci-fi, all my usual suspects. And then rating-wise, very, very solid. Not as good as last month, because last month was kind of wild, but still very solid. My average rating was 3.5 stars, and if you look at the distribution, the most frequently given rating I had was 4 stars. So very solid. I had almost all things that I was enjoying, and even things that were disappointing or like not my favorites, I was still giving 3 stars to for the most part. So, that's like a B. So overall, very strong rating month. And then before we get into my disappointments, surprises, and hits, let's talk about some of the ARCs that I read that I'm not going to talk about in a different category and that I didn't talk about in my mid-month check-in. So I read The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray, which I had kind of mixed feelings on. I definitely think it's worth picking up. Premise of this is basically all of Jane Austen characters converge in a country house and somebody kills Mr. Wickham, and it's a murder mystery trying to figure out who done it. I thought that the plot dragged a little bit, so it wasn't like a favorite, but I thought that this was just super fun. If you like Jane Austen and you like a whodunit, this will do that. I gave it 3 stars because, like I said, I think I had just basically had some like plot pacing issues. But in terms of vibes and just enjoyment, I think that this was really entertaining. So if that appeals to you, I think it's totally worth giving a shot. And then I also read The Wedding Crasher by Mia Sosa. She's just a very solid technician. I feel like she constructs her romances in a way that really makes sense. There's a lot of symmetry and sort of parallelism. And this book, like, I think I mentioned this in the mid-month check-in, that Set on You, I think, was like an actual rom-com in a book. This is probably the rom-commiest book I've read, where the plot beats and sort of overall vibes of a rom-com gets translated into a book. I don't know that I connected with the characters because it did feel so cinematic that I felt like there was a lack of like deep character work, but I thought this was funny. I thought that this made sense in terms of the kind of overall plot journey, and I really liked one twist that this had in terms of subverting expectations for a fake dating trope. I really enjoyed that towards the end. So I don't want to give a spoiler, but I thought that that was smart. So yeah, 4 stars. This one was really, really solid. And yeah, again, this makes me kind of have an existential crisis about my state of affairs with contemporary romance, because I seem to just be falling out of love with what I used to like just fully love emotionally. So like intellectually, this is a 4-star. Emotionally, I didn't love this the way that I have loved some romances in the past. I don't know. Anyway, this is super good, super fun. If you liked The Worst Best Man, I think you should definitely check this out. And then the last arc that I wanted to mention is Something Wilder by Christina Lauren. Now, I have an up and down relationship with Christina Lauren. They can be a little bit hit or miss for me. This was a really interesting book from them. It is what I would describe as an action-adventure romance, and it is a second chance romance. I believed the romance. I liked it. I thought that the plot was really fun. It basically ends up being sort of like a treasure huntery kind of book. And I thought that that was enjoyable. There was just a sort of underlying sadness, though, to this that doesn't really feel typical of a genre romance. It's very wistful or bittersweet is sort of the overall vibes, because it's a lot about loss and a lot about like what could have been. And you know, ultimately it's a romance, so obviously there's going to be an optimistic, positive future. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, there's just a sort of like melancholy tone to this that I don't know that we get a lot of in romance, and it was just interesting. So they continue to be an author that I always look to. I'm always interested in their new releases. I really enjoyed this one. It's not my favorite from them, but I think it was different and fresh, and certainly worth seeking out. I don't know that we have a ton of action-adventure romances out there, and I'm glad that this is one that is getting a big push, and it's something a little different. So per my previous statement about falling out of love with contemporary romance, I think what I'm finding is just that I'm looking for like newer, fresher things than what I've been picking up for the most part. So that's more on me than anything else. But anyway, side note, introspection over. Let's transition to my surprises, hits, and disappointments. Okay, starting with disappointments. Two of these I talked about in reading vlogs, so I will refer you for like the full skinny to those videos. But the first one and the most disappointing was Death and the Dancing Footman. This one, it bored me. There were some interesting elements of it, but for a thriller or for a whodunit, I just found it kind of tedious and just not fun. And this is the kind of book I just want to have fun in. So for that reason, pretty disappointing. And then Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. I bet this is a disappointment not because it's like the worst thing I've ever read, but just because I genuinely thought that this could have been, like, I was expecting this to be a 4 to 5 star book. It was good. The quality of the writing is very nice. Like, I get why people like this, but I would argue intrinsic ableism of the project of it distracted me and really detracted from my enjoyment. I would say that because it sounds like Angie Kim may be the mother of an autistic child, I think she was really centering that experience, and maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. That's kind of what I surmised from some of the comments. She was really centering that experience, but not the actual experience of somebody who has autism. That was kind of my take on this, but anyway, I can see why people enjoy this, and I think it's very thought-provoking. It's well executed in the other components of it, but that just personally really detracted from my experience of the book. And then 2 other disappointments, both of which are finales to series that I've really enjoyed, and both of which are not bad. I just am putting them as disappointing because, you know, you don't want to come to the end of a series and feel like, meh. I'll talk about the one that I don't have in physical form first, and that's Dark Fire by Ruby Dixon. I did enjoy this book. I very rarely have a bad time in a Ruby Dixon book. Like, I struggle to even think of one I've given less than 3 stars. But this series, I think, suffered from the pandemic and the timing of the pandemic. What I've surmised from some of her author's notes and such is that she just really got in a place where she wasn't enjoying writing this series anymore because it is post-apocalyptic. And I just can see why that would have been a bummer to be in the middle of when a pandemic hits. And this finale book, part of why I'm disappointed is that the premise or the setup for it is so juicy. It is the villain of the series and his love story. And I will say she does, I think, a good job of telling you up front that there is dub-con / non-con in this, because there is sort of like a quid pro quo element. So if you don't like that, you also won't want to read this. I think, you know, maybe the reason this ended up being disappointing is just, it's not what I come to Ruby Dixon for. I want a himbo. I want Grump Sunshine, which this kind of is, but not really. I liked the character development, but I felt like the resolution of their love story was fine, but not great. The overall macro plot resolution was just a little bit, it left me wanting more. And she did mention in her, after like her author's note, that she may revisit this world or like this version of Earth in a future series. And I wonder if I'll do better with that when she kind of has some new energy for the series, because it's a cool setup, and I would recommend the series as a whole. It really gets started really in the 3rd book. The first 2 were only so-so to me. But yeah, just a little bit disappointing. And then the other disappointment I am going to say is Flamebringer by Elle Katharine White. Now, the non-disappointing piece of this is the fact that I finally finished this trilogy. Applause. Aren't we all so proud of Mara right now? And this is not a bad book. I gave this 3 stars because it feels like 20 pounds of plot in a 2-pound bag. There's just so much happening, and I think when I think of the overall course of the trilogy and everything that happens in it, I just think the pacing of the series as a whole is off, and I think this is the weakest of the 3. I will say, Heartstone, the first book, which really reads as a standalone, and I think at this point now that I've read the trilogy, unless you just loved Heartstone the way that I did, Heartstone I put in my top 50 all-time favorite books. Like, I love that book. Unless you feel that way about that book, I probably wouldn't recommend going on in the series. Just read it as a standalone. It's basically Pride and Prejudice retelling with dragons. It's a fantasy world. I really like that fantasy world. I really, really recommend Heartstone, which is the first book. And if you just like it and are not super passionate about it, just stop there. Don't keep going, because while I think if you enjoyed that first book as much as I did, it was worth it to keep going, the series as a whole I don't think fully holds up. So, disappointing, bummer. But I did still have a good enough time reading this. I do still think of overall this series fondly in the sense of how much I love Heartstone, but this particular entry, a little bit of a disappointment. And then I had 3 surprises, all of which I enjoyed. There was just something kind of surprising about them to me. Okay, so first, 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. I'll tell you that they're... I'm very conflicted about how to talk about this book, because I don't think a lot of people are gonna like this book, and when I have my objective critique hat on, I'm like, yeah, I don't know that this book fully came together, particularly in the middle. I think it was pretty baggy, but this is just so my kind of trope that I just was entertained. I was so thoroughly entertained by this. I had a great time. It was just my kind of serial killer trope, which is basically the setup is 9 people get a list with their name on it, and it's a list of 9 people's names, and then they slowly start being killed. And so we're trying to figure out why, if it's totally random, if there's something that connects all of them, etc. And I don't know, man. This is so fun. But I think people are going to rightly complain that it's kind of drags. And yeah, the end result, I think I enjoyed, and I enjoyed the way it's playing with "and then there were nuns" setup. I found that satisfying. But again, I wonder if other people will feel that way. I was very entertained by this. If you were the kind of person who is entertained by the same kind of books I like in thriller, I think you'll have a good time with this one. But quality-wise, I'm not going to make the argument that this is a great book. Then Jade City. I put this as a surprise because I know so many people have loved it, but I do also have some friends who have really not enjoyed it. And the other thing that surprised me about this is that it's fantasy, and it's really urban fantasy, but it's different or unusual tropes. High fantasy that happens to be set in a city with a lot of elements that are very much our own world. For example, there's an airport. You know what I mean? But it reads much more like a high fantasy book. And I guess I don't know that I've ever read a book with quite that tone. I didn't absolutely love this. I wonder if this suffers from the fact that the big fantasy book that I had read right before this was Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb, which is top tier fantasy. So I wonder if this just sort of suffered in my estimation from it. But this went some places I wasn't expecting it to go. And by the end of the book, I was really into the characters. So I definitely am going to keep going in the series. I don't know that right now it's set up to be a favorite, but I think that I'm going to enjoy it. And I did enjoy this. I can definitely see why this was prime adaptation fodder. Okay, and then the last one. This is a surprise because I thought that this was one of the easiest 5-star picks that I had on my 5-star prediction list. And once I got into it and realized it was mixed media, I even more so thought that this was a shoo-in for a 5-star. This is a 4, borderline 4.5, but there are things about this book that just annoyed me, even though I did find it overall very fun and enjoyable, and I will keep going in the series. The 2 things that annoy me about this and kept taking me out of the story, one is that for some reason they've retconned this to be set in the US versus in the UK. But they did not do a thorough enough job of it. Some of the turns of phrase are things that we just don't say in America. Somebody referred to someone else fancying someone a couple of times, and I'm like, yeah, I know what that means, but an American teenager just is not using that slang. Some of the kind of like setups, or even just the fact that some of the main characters are immigrants from Nigeria and India. Now, India, yes, but there's just not that many Nigerian immigrants in the US, but there are a lot of Nigerian immigrants in the UK. Like, just little things like that I'm just like, it's not that it's wrong, it just doesn't totally like click. I don't know. There was little things like that. And then also, the other thing that kind of bothered me about this is that I couldn't help but feel like it was inspired by a real life true crime case. And I don't know that I liked what it was potentially saying about that true crime case. And I don't want to get into spoilers for that, but it made me a little uncomfortable about what it says about like victims of crime. I don't know. This opens up like the whole, ethical quagmire that is true crime. And I enjoy true crime. I'm not trying to like act like I'm above this, but I don't know. Those two things kept this from being a 5-star. And otherwise, I love this. Like, the plot is exactly my thing. I love that it's mixed media. I love that it's secrets from the past. All of that I loved, and I will definitely keep going in the series. But I'm just like, I was surprised and bummed that those things were there, because they bugged me and kept me from just like fully loving this. Anyway, I feel like I'm coming out very negative on this for a book that I had a great time in. I still really like this, okay? I just want to be clear on that. And then I had 5 hits, 3 of which appeared in more detail in vlogs, so I'll mostly just point you there, or in just other videos. So first of all, a 4-star book that I very much enjoyed is Laziness Does Not Exist by Devin Price. I used this as a reference in my work commentary video that went up earlier this week. And this reminds me a lot of Do Nothing from Celeste Headley, but sort of a slightly different perspective on it. Whereas Do Nothing is sort of like a pro argument of saying like, idleness is good. This is more of the saying like, also laziness isn't a thing. It's kind of two halves of the same point. And I really enjoyed the history in this. And also, there's a lot of social commentary in this that I think is great. I think that there are some different use cases that suggest interesting sort of like how-to things, or things that you could take away into your own life. And all in all, I just really like this. I also liked how Devin Price talked about like marginal identities and how the concept of laziness gets mapped into them. I believe they are trans, so I think that they're kind of primed to take a more intersectional approach. Yeah, it's similar to Celeste Headley, by the way. I think sometimes coming from a marginalized identity sort of like possibly opens your eyes to ways that these kinds of macro narratives are imposed on people, and brings a fresh or a different kind of take than somebody who's not coming from that perspective. And I appreciated that piece of this book in particular. So anyway, all that to say, I really enjoyed this. I think this is very worthwhile. I listened to it on audio first, and I think it works well as audio. Yeah, I just really like this. Empire Sand, I gushed about in my Tarot Card Picks My TBR vlog. 4.5 stars. Absolutely, this is so great. I don't know that I've seen very many people who didn't like this, and for good reason. This is deeply enjoyable and just fun, like just a great time. I think this has a lot of thematic things to say about promises, I guess, and what it means to vow something. I really enjoyed that as like a motif and a repetition, a theme. I thought that was really well handled. The love story, I think, in this is great. The magic is really intriguing. I'd like to see more in this world, though I've heard that the sequel to this duology is not very good, so I'm not going to pick that up. But yeah, I really, really, really enjoyed this. Totally one of those like very much worth the hype kind of books. So I love this. And then Piranesi, another one that I think is very much worth the hype. This was also in my Tarot Cards Pick My TBR vlog. And I just think that this is really thought-provoking. It's very fable-like. I think that this has a lot to say also about religion and belief and sort of seeking. Yeah, I just realized the resonance there for both of those, which also made sense in the overall tone of that vlog. So yeah, if you're wondering my thoughts about this, it's so short, and it's a book I think you should just kind of encounter. I don't know, you've probably heard enough about it if you are on online bookish spaces to know whether or not this might be something worth picking up. If it intrigues you, I say go for it. I think that it's interesting, thought-provoking, could be a very good book club pick, and can be read either very deeply or just sort of like more surface level fable-like, which is kind of how I approached it. So yeah, this one was great as well. Okay, and then the two I have not referenced in other videos, and I don't have either of these in physical form. Yet, because of both of these I'm gonna get in physical form. The first one is Storm Echo by Nalini Singh, and I just realized I probably can't tell you all that much about this book because it's the, 19th, 20th book in the series, and so I don't know. I'll just say that if you are a reader of the series, we get some like extremely exciting macro plot stuff happening in this one, and the romance I think worked. I liked the romance. I think that the part of the way the microplots narrative structure worked in the middle was a little anticlimactic because it's referencing things that we have seen in the past from another character's point of view. So we, the audience, know what is happening and the characters don't. And so it creates almost like a miscommunication trope, even though I think Nalini Singh goes to pains to illustrate why it's not purely miscommunication. I think the audience experience of it is that it feels like miscommunication. And so that was a little bit frustrating, and that's what kept this from being a 4.5 for me. But the macro plot stuff is absolutely fantastic, and I loved it, and it was exciting, and I cannot wait to see what happens in the next book because it definitely ends on a big bang. And then the book that I would say is my favorite for the month is The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile. Now, this is another one where I am guessing that other people may not enjoy this as much as I did. This is a book within a book, which is something I really enjoy, and I really loved the framing device. As much as I like the actual book itself, I loved the framing device. And then the book within a book is sort of a reversed locked room mystery because basically these four people are in a reading room in the Boston Public Library, and they hear a scream, and the security guards come in and say, hey, everybody has to stay where they are while we check this out. So they are all in there for an extended time together. They kind of meet and form a friendship, and in that first chapter we find out from the point of view character, like, that was when I first met a murderer. So it's sort of like a reverse locked room because they were all together while a murder was happening outside. Like, how did that happen? And then it's an unfolding. We've got like secrets from the past, not everybody is who they say they are. All of the things of this I found so entertaining and just fun. There were moments of not loving the actual writing of the book within a book, but in some ways the author kind of has an out there because you can just say it's the fictitious writer who is writing in this style. So there we go. I don't know, but I just had such a good time in this book. This is sort of like 9 Lives where I'm like, I can see some flaws, but I'm just so much less so than in 9 Lives, but I'm just so thoroughly entertained by this. I'm just having the best time. I just think this was so fun, and what I like in thrillers, there's the meta quality. There's also a romantic element in it that really worked for me. I'm a sucker for romance. I think that in particular is something other readers are not going to enjoy, and in the framing device, there's some critique of that element in the book. But anyway, I absolutely really just enjoyed this book so thoroughly. I have another book from her on my TBR, and so I'm excited to pick that up ASAP because this one was just so fun. And with that concludes my month of reading in March. Definitely let me know how your reading went in March. Hits, surprises, disappointments, how you doing? And yeah, I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!